Talk with Jiggy right now at 1-866-763-1242 and email jiggyjaguar@jiggyjaguar.com.
Welcome back to the final segment of our broadcast today. We've got Frank Vernuccio from USA Gov Policy waiting in the wings. He is waiting on the telephone for us, and we will go to him here in just a few seconds. Get a hold of us online, jiggyjaguar.com. Also, find us iHeartRadio and AMFM247.com. Radio Xenu as well. We thank you for joining us today. And let's start with Frank Vernuccio. Frank, investigators are probing whether Debbie Wasserman Schultz arrested IT aides, sold some sensitive data to foreign intel agencies. What do you have for us, my friend, on this?
You know, James, it's kind of fascinating. In the 24-hour news cycle, scandals are always sort of at the top of the page, and it seems the media is eager to grasp on just about anything to put some play into it, except, of course, for those that seem to affect the leadership of the Democrat Party. Now, we've seen in the past couple of months two really weird stories. We've seen, for example, noted anti-Semite Keith Ellison, representative from Minnesota, who has become vice chair of the Democrat Party. And that's certainly a very odd piece of news that the press has, for the most part, ignored. But perhaps even more explosive is the story connecting Debbie Wasserman Schultz, former chair of the Democrat National Committee, with Pakistani tech staffers who apparently were spying for Pakistan or even Russian intelligence. Now, about 16 months ago, it started off as a scandal that simply had to do with the alleged theft of a computer and some computer equipment from Congress. Not from the Democrats itself, but from Congress by these Democrat-hired people. Now, as it turns out that these people who have taken this equipment, basically working for Debbie Wasserman Schultz, now have access to all sorts of sensitive data in the United States. Just as Hillary Clinton's email scandals have not produced, as of yet, any kind of judicial prosecution, so far Debbie Wasserman Schultz has been exempt from any kind of prosecution based on this scandal. And the salient question we have to ask, Jim, is why?
We've got the fantastic Frank Vernuccio with us today. He joins us live here on our big broadcast here on Radio Xenu to finish things up for the day. And Frank, let's talk about President Trump's recent speech about Afghanistan. And there's a heck of a lot to unpack there. Give us your thoughts, my friend.
You know, when you really start reading this speech, you begin to realize what a significant change this is from former American foreign policy. The president has actually come up with a concept that seems to be strangely missing from the United States wars after World War II. The idea that we put an armed force into a particular conflict to actually win the conflict. And it seems that in everything from Vietnam to Afghanistan, the U.S. has engaged in things like winning the hearts and minds of the people, nation building, and all that sort of thing. Things which politicians love because it makes them look great to the folks back home. But it seems the component of why we put in armed forces in the first place, to actually win a fight, has been missing from U.S. military strategy. Indeed, even in the first Gulf War, when President George Bush, the father, committed, while certainly the Iraqi armed forces were knocked out, Saddam Hussein was not taken out. Then we flash forward to the 21st century. George Bush, 43, the son, certainly knocked out the Iraqi armed forces again. But rather than hold on to that victory, which started to produce results, remember those wonderful pictures of people with purple thumbs holding them up saying, I voted in the first democratic election in Iraq in decades?
Yeah.
President Obama kind of threw that all away and opted instead to provide, civilian assistance to Iraq rather than military assistance. Flash forward to Afghanistan, America's longest war. And a lot of time and a lot of attention and a lot of money has been put into rebuilding the Afghanistan nation at the same time that we've been reducing the forces and the cash that we're committing to actually beat the enemy. President Trump took a look at this and said this seems to be rather backwards. First you win the war, then you worry about rebuilding the civilian government or civilian population. A lot of leaders, a lot of politicians point to what we did in Germany and Japan. We built those countries into successful democratic nations with booming economies. Well, that's all well and good, except there's one little detail that seems to be forgotten. Germany and Japan were both totally defeated before we started nation building. That makes a lot more sense, and that's one of the things that President Trump was alluding to. The other part that made a lot of sense that the president said Monday night was, let's let the generals run the wars rather than politicians. Well, certainly no one is ever going to allow the military to decide when and where to go to conflict. Once the president and the United States government has decided to put troops into conflict, the actual technical details of how that conflict is conducted really should go to the experts, the people on the field, the military itself. The civilian meddling in that type of activity really hasn't produced much in the way of positive results. It would be kind of like, James, if you went to the hospital for heart surgery and you decided to give the bookkeepers, the clerks, the janitors, and everyone else a say in how the operation would go. Not the idea that you really want to be faced with.
It's Frank Vernuccio. He joins us today here on Radio Xenu. And to finish off our radio broadcast today, let's talk about this odd failure, it seems, these Barcelona-style terrorist attacks. It's just sort of an odd failure of addressing them. Give me your thoughts on this, my friend.
The latest horrific attack in Barcelona, of course, this has now become the norm. Europe seems to be a continent under constant siege from terrorism, particularly those who have either in one generation or two generations become part of the European scene. One has to wonder why leaders like Angela Merkel of Germany have not been more responsive to the threats against her own citizens. And James, it's a very interesting web when you start to take a look at it. European politicians have made their bones, have become successfully reelected time and time again, based on continuing to promise more and more social welfare benefits to their voters. Well, something happened in Europe. The economy really isn't able to sustain those benefits any longer. The population is starting to dwindle a bit. The birth rates aren't significant. They're not really replacing their population in any significant way. Politicians, rather than saying, you know, we can't afford these benefits anymore, we have to cut back a bit and be more realistic, simply decided to allow a lot more people onto the continent in the hopes that they would eventually provide the tax base for the politicians to keep handing out social welfare goodies so that they could get reelected. That's really kind of dirty pool. They're losing the continent, they're losing their culture, they're losing their independence as great nations, and it's all to get the politicians reelected.
It's Frank Vernuccio. He joins us live here on our big broadcast. And Frank, thanks for joining us today. I look forward to talking to you next week, my friend.
James, I look forward to our next discussion.
Definitely. We'll talk then. Thank you, Frank. That's Frank Vernuccio. We are going to take a timeout and join us